The morning light falls soft and golden over the little settlement tucked between the hills, where a thin curl of smoke rises from the chimney of the smallest house on the lane. Inside, a round-faced fellow named Pip is already awake, moving with quiet intention through the first hours of the day. Pip is known around the village for two things: his patience and his appetite. Today, both of those qualities are going to be put to magnificent use, because today is not a regular day. Today, Pip is going to make a pizza, not just any pizza, giant, golden, bubbling, magnificent homemade pizza, and he is going to cook it underground. Pip stretches his arms wide as he steps outside into the cool morning air. The world around him is just waking up. A few birds chirp from the branches of the old oak tree near the well. The cobblestones beneath his boots are still damp with dew. He takes a deep breath, lets it out slowly, and smiles. He has been planning this for days. Every ingredient has been thought through. Every step has been rehearsed in his mind a dozen times over. Now it is finally time to begin. The first thing Pip does is walk to the edge of his garden, where a small stone pit has been dug into the earth over the past 2 mornings. It is about the size of a large barrel laid on its side, lined with clay bricks and sealed tightly to hold heat. This underground oven is Pip's great invention, his pride and joy. He built it with his own hands, packing the clay carefully between the bricks, smoothing the surface until every joint was tight and every corner was square. When it heats up properly, the temperature inside reaches something close to magnificent. He learned the technique from an old book he found at the back of the village library, one with cracked leather covers and pages soft as cloth from years of handling. The idea is simple. You heat the earth. The earth holds the heat. And then the heat cooks everything slowly and perfectly from every direction at once. As if the food were being embraced rather than burned, Pip kneels beside the pit and begins placing small pieces of dry wood at the center. He arranges them with care, building a little nest of kindling first, then layering larger pieces on top in a cross pattern to allow air to flow between them. He strikes a match, holds it to the edge of the kindling, and watches the flame take hold. It grows slowly, cautiously at first, like something learning to trust itself. Then it catches, and a warm orange glow fills the bottom of the pit. Pip replaces the heavy clay lid and leaves the fire to do its work. The oven will need a good hour to reach the right temperature, so there is plenty of time to prepare. He walks back into the kitchen and stands at the long wooden table near the window. If you have never seen the inside of Pip's kitchen, it is worth describing. The ceiling is low and warm, hung with bunches of dried herbs and strings of garlic. The shelves are crowded with small jars of spices, each one labeled in Pip's careful handwriting. There is a window above the sink that looks out over the garden, and on the sill sits a little pot of basil, its leaves deep green and fragrant in the morning light. The whole place smells like someone has been cooking for centuries, and in a way, that is not far from the truth. Pip pulls a large ceramic bowl from the shelf and sets it on the table with a satisfying thud. He reaches for the bag of flour he measured out the night before and tips it slowly into the bowl, watching the fine white cloud billow up and then settle. He makes a well in the center, like a small crater in a pale mountain, and into it he pours warm water that he has already measured to exactly the right temperature. Not too hot, not too cold, just warm enough that it feels comfortable on the inside of his wrist. He sprinkles in a pinch of sugar, then crumbles in the yeast he prepared earlier, a little pile of beige granules that will soon come alive and transform the entire mixture. He lets it sit for a moment, watching for the first signs of activity. A tiny bubble appears at the surface, then another. The yeast is waking up, ready to work. If you are enjoying this so far, do yourself a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps more than you might think, and it keeps videos like this one coming your way. Pip adds a generous pinch of salt to the flour around the edges of the well, careful not to let it touch the yeast directly just yet. Then he drizzles in a swirl of olive oil, golden and fragrant, that catches the light from the window as it falls. He plunges his hands into the bowl and begins to bring everything together, folding the wet into the dry with slow, deliberate motions. At first it is shaggy and rough, a sticky mess that clings to his fingers and pulls at itself. But Pip is patient. He works the dough steadily, pressing and folding, turning the bowl a quarter rotation with each push. The texture begins to change. It becomes smoother, more cooperative, more alive under his hands. After 10 minutes of this quiet, rhythmic work, the dough is soft as a pillow, elastic and smooth, pulling away from the sides of the bowl in one clean piece. Pip shapes it into a round ball and sets it back in the bowl, covering it with a clean cloth. He places it near the warm side of the hearth, where the heat is gentle and steady. The dough will rest here and rise for the next hour, doubling in size as the yeast does its invisible, magnificent work. In the meantime, there is a sauce to be made. He moves to the other end of the table and opens the jar of tomatoes he preserved last summer. The smell that rises from the jar is extraordinary, deep and sweet and slightly sharp, the concentrated essence of a long sunny season. He pours them into a shallow pot and sets it over a low flame. He adds a bay leaf, a small pinch of dried chili, a generous pour of olive oil, and several cloves of garlic that he has crushed with the flat of his knife. The garlic sizzles quietly as it hits the warm oil, and the smell that blooms from the pot is enough to make anyone stop whatever they are doing and pay attention. Pip stirs it gently, then leaves it to simmer on the lowest possible heat, barely a whisper of a flame, for the next 30 minutes. Low and slow. That is the secret. You cannot rush a good sauce any more than you can rush the sunrise. While the sauce simmers and the dough rises, Pip steps back outside to check on his underground oven. He kneels beside it and carefully removes the clay lid. A wave of heat rushes up to meet his face, dry and intense and deeply satisfying. He can see that the wood has burned down to a thick bed of glowing embers, exactly what he was hoping for. He uses a long-handled wooden paddle to rake the coals to the sides of the pit, creating a clear central space where the pizza stone will sit. The stone is a large, flat piece of granite he found at the edge of the creek bed and carried home on his back last autumn. He has kept it seasoned with oil through the winter months, and now it is dark and smooth and ready to work. He lowers it carefully into the pit using 2 thick padded gloves, setting it directly over the center of the embers. The coals on either side will radiate heat upward and inward, surrounding the stone on all sides and cooking the pizza evenly across its entire surface. He replaces the lid and goes back inside. The sauce is ready, thick and fragrant and beautifully reduced. He fishes out the bay leaf, tastes it with a small spoon, and nods. Perfect. He adds a few torn leaves of fresh basil and a pinch of black pepper, stirs it one final time, and sets it aside to cool slightly. The dough has risen beautifully, swelled to nearly twice its original size, domed and trembling slightly when he lifts the cloth. He tips it out onto a lightly floured surface and gently presses it down, easing the air out with his palms. He lets it rest for another 5 minutes, then begins to shape it. He stretches it gently with his knuckles, working from the center outward in slow expanding circles. He does not roll it. Rolling would crush the bubbles that give the crust its texture. Instead, he coaxes it larger and larger, rotating it constantly, letting gravity help as he holds it up, and lets the weight of the dough do some of the work. It grows thinner and wider, a wide pale disc that wobbles slightly in the air before he lowers it onto the wooden paddle. Now comes the dressing. He spoons the tomato sauce across the surface in a wide spiral, working from the center outward and leaving a clean border all around the edge for the crust. The sauce goes on in a thin, even layer, just enough to color the dough without drowning it. Then comes the cheese, a generous handful of fresh mozzarella he has torn into rough chunks with his fingers, scattered across the sauce in uneven pieces so that it will melt into pools of different sizes, some thick and stretchy, some thin and slightly crispy at the edges. Over the top he drapes several slices of cured meat from the smokehouse, thin and deeply savory, curled at the edges like little scrolls, a drizzle of olive oil, a scattering of dried oregano rubbed between his palms so that it releases its fragrance before it ever touches the heat. And one final touch, 3 more fresh basil leaves pressed lightly into the surface. Pip carries the loaded paddle outside with great care and kneels beside the pit. He lifts the lid and a tremendous wall of heat rises to meet him. The stone inside is glowing, visibly shimmering with stored energy. He angles the paddle, gives it a quick, confident shake, and the pizza slides off the end and lands perfectly centered on the stone. He replaces the lid immediately, sealing all that heat inside. Now there is nothing to do but wait, and if you have not subscribed yet, now is the perfect moment. Hit that button, and you will never miss another video from the village. Each one is made with the same care that Pip is putting into this pizza right now. The minutes pass slowly and beautifully. Pip sits on the low stone wall beside the pit and listens. After about 4 minutes, he can hear the faintest sound rising from beneath the clay lid, a low, gentle bubbling as the cheese begins to melt and the crust begins to set. A thin thread of steam escapes from the edge of the lid, carrying with it the most extraordinary smell: baking bread and roasted tomato and melted cheese and something deeper underneath, the smell of stone and earth and fire, ancient and comforting and completely impossible to describe to someone who has never experienced it. He lifts the lid at the 8-minute mark to take a look. The crust around the edge is puffed up magnificently, pale gold in some places and beginning to blister in others. The cheese is fully melted, running together into a continuous golden landscape scattered with dark bubbled spots. The meat has curled and crisped slightly at the edges. The basil leaves have wilted and darkened, their edges just beginning to color. Pip replaces the lid for another 2 minutes. When he opens it again, the pizza is done. The crust is a deep, uneven gold, dark in the spots where it touched the stone directly. The cheese is bubbling lazily, just barely still moving. He slides the paddle back under the pizza with one clean motion and lifts it clear of the pit. He carries it inside and sets it on the table, and for a moment he simply stands there looking at it because it is genuinely beautiful. A large, imperfect, magnificent thing, steaming on the wooden table. He lets it rest for 2 full minutes before cutting it. This is important. The cheese needs to set just slightly so that it does not all slide off the moment the knife goes through. Then he picks up the old round cutter from the drawer, presses it to the surface, and begins to roll. The crust parts cleanly, the cheese stretches and snaps, the steam rises from the cut edges in soft white curls. Pip lifts the first slice and holds it up for a moment before taking a bite. The crust bends slightly at the tip, just enough, then holds. He bites through, and the crunch is everything he hoped it would be. The inside is soft and airy with a faint sweetness from the slow rise. The sauce is bright and sharp against the richness of the cheese. The meat is salty and savory. The basil is fragrant and slightly sweet. The whole thing is, in a word, perfect. He sits down at the table by the window, the same window where the basil still grows in its little pot, and eats slowly and with complete attention, because this is the kind of food that deserves it. Outside, the village is fully awake now, and the sound of the day drifts in through the open window. But inside, everything is quiet and warm and deeply, completely satisfying. Share this video with someone who loves good food. And next time you have a free afternoon and a patch of earth, consider building an oven of your own. You might be surprised what the ground beneath your feet is capable of.